There has long been a need in the South Bay for a television talk show that can provide hard news with an urban multicultural point of view. We're talking about a gathering of journalists and commentators who can discuss and analyze the headlines, current events, and you know what politicians offer to feed us, right? Hopefully my next guest will soon be hosting such a program, and she's here today to talk about who she is, what she does, which can only mean good news is coming to Inglewood. Her name is Erin Aubry Kaplan. Erin, welcome to the Roundtable.
Oh, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Let's talk about, we'll talk about the possibility of doing a show, on a hard news show, which I'm sure you'd be brilliant doing. But let's talk about you and what you do. You're a writer, a journalist, columnist.
Yeah.
Talk about what you do.
Well, I'm a weekly columnist for the op-ed section of the LA Times. And I've been doing that since November. And as it happens, I'm the first African-American op-ed columnist they've ever had. Weekly columnist. That's a good thing, but it's a little stunning that that's the case.
It is.
Anyway, I'm happy to be there, and it's kind of a wide open thing. It's I can write about what I think is interesting and important, relevant. So it's kind of a free form for me. And prior to that, I worked at the LA Weekly for almost 9 years.
Love that paper.
Yeah, it was a good run. I did. It's a much smaller operation, so I did a lot. I kind of wore a lot of hats. I actually did a column for a couple of years. I did theater reviews.
Oh, I've read you. I read the paper all the time. So, and the name was vaguely familiar, but and I've read you.
Yeah, well, you know what? I confused some people. I got married in those 9 years. I was Erin Aubry for a long time, and I got married. I became Kaplan, and I just couldn't quite drop my maiden name, so I kept it. So. Anyway, so that's what, gosh, that accounts for that's 10 years right there. But the funny thing is, I actually started out writing in journalism at the LA Times, way back in 1992. So I kind of made this big circle, kind of came back to the LA Times. And in 92, I got into journalism because, as you might recall, in 92 we had a civil unrest in Los Angeles.
Oh, yes.
And the Times and other papers suddenly discovered that, hey, we weren't doing quite enough coverage of urban communities, central LA, and places that were really affected by the riot. So
let's get Erin.
Yeah, well, hey, it didn't quite happen that way, but yeah, I was. It sounds strange to say I was fortunate. I benefited from that event. I was recruited by the Times to cover issues and kind of get in the streets and figure out what was really going on, because the Times realized they weren't doing that great a job of it. So that's where I started. And I started out covering the Crenshaw district, pretty much, which still is pretty much the last predominantly African-American community in LA. And I was thrilled to do it. I thought I was going to be saving the world, sort of. But that effort only went 3 years, and then we had a recession, and papers started losing money. So, but I always kept this thing in mind that I wanted to, do journalism with some kind of difference, not just report news, but kind of let people know what it all meant, and where LA was going, and particularly what it meant for communities of color, because I think it's a critical moment for us, and it always is, isn't it?
Yes.
And I really have in the last few years kind of really been looking at Inglewood. I live here, and I grew up here, and to me, Inglewood is really like a symbol of so many things. It's got such potential. It's geographically in a wonderful place in LA, in the LA area.
Sure.
But
stone's throw from the airport.
Stone's throw from the airport, not far from the ocean. You could, a realtor. It's kind of a realtor's dream. But we have things that we haven't quite done yet, and things that take some political courage to do, and. So that's been kind of my one of the things I've been focusing on in my writing, and I'm happy to bring that to the Times, because actually the coverage of this part of the South Bay has been kind of lost in the shuffle. So I try to cover that in columns. It's not really possible with everything else going on in the world, but fortunately I have more of a local focus. So other people can write about you know, the White House, etc. Although I try to get that in there too,
Sure.
via Inglewood.
Speaking of Inglewood, which is where you're living, the changing demographics here, is that going to affect the way you report, or?
Well, you know, that's one of the things.
It's becoming an integrated city. It has become an integrated city.
Oh, well, that's been true for a long time. It's been happening, as we know, all over LA. And it's been happening in a particular way in communities where that have been predominantly black, that are now becoming predominantly Latino. Yeah, and that has obvious political implications. You know, who's going to represent who?
Right.
And black politicians are in a panic because our numbers are going down percentage-wise. I think we had a total. There were 6 black elected officials in Sacramento, now up to 9. In the last election, we actually gained a few seats. Somehow that happened. Still not very many. So there's that political anxiety that goes on. But I'm more interested in, because, you know, that political thing is being covered, sort of. But I want to kind of know what it means, you know, psychologically and sort of just kind of on a day-to-day basis. Like, I live in a neighborhood that is undergoing that transition, I guess. And it's not just that you lose you lose representation. Your supermarkets start changing, you know, they start carrying, you know, items that are geared to the Latino market. All that stuff is there's not any real, that has an impact on, like, African Americans that really hasn't been measured yet. You know, there's a great nervousness about, you know, what is, you know, even defining the word, you know, what is our community anymore? In LA, which is very transient anyway, and, you know, where do we put down roots? Where are they?
Yeah.
Where are they going to go? And that's not a political question. That's more of a, like I said, a psychological kind of question that we're all asking ourselves. But of course, we help it because we move away. Right. And, you know, that's what people do. They move away. But for us, we kind of look back and say, gee, we moved away, so where do we live now? and it's just very, you know, it's very complicated. And, you know, this has all been brought to the fore with the whole immigration issue, with the immigration rights and what that means. And we haven't talked about it all that well. But it ends up either we say nothing, or it ends up sounding paranoid and racially paranoid. And so I just want to write about all the things that don't get said, or that don't get said well.
Well, the last election kind of proves that black candidates don't necessarily have to depend on black voters.
They can't.
Especially in Inglewood.
Right, right. I think in Inglewood the electorate is still predominantly African American, right, although the demographics are about half and half. Right. And that's just a matter of time, though, before that changes. But the funny thing is, in Sacramento, we gained 3. I say that loosely. We gained 3 seats but those African Americans running in those districts are not black districts. So what that means is kind of stating the obvious. We can run in districts that aren't African American and still win.
Right. Well, do you think that Inglewood will soon be gentrifying?
No. Well, that's interesting. It hasn't happened yet. That's one of the things that could happen. And gentrification as a whole, you know, in some people's mind, that's a positive thing. Frankly, I think gentrification is a polite word for more whites coming into an area, and then suddenly everything gets better. Well, you know, that doesn't always happen, but we have, I think the north part of Inglewood, the part that is going up into Ladera Heights, you know, going north out of the city, is feeling that a little bit. But for the most part, people haven't discovered Inglewood. Right. I have my theories about why that's true, but.
Would you care to elaborate?
Yeah. Well, you know something? Inglewood is mostly black and brown. It has some whites, not a significant number, and people just frankly afraid of too many African Americans and Latinos. They're just not going to quite, you know. There has to be some other white community nearby that's going to make them, you know, that will make them feel comfortable. This is my theory. I'm just speaking for myself.
That's an interesting theory.
We have Hawthorne to the south. We have El Segundo, a very you know, pretty affluent little community to the west. But Inglewood, I think, has suffered from an image problem, thanks in part to Hollywood, and to popular culture. You know, Inglewood gets into rap music, and it's part of that. You know, North Long Beach, Compton, Inglewood. It just has this sort of mythical, kind of urban mythical aura.
Yeah.
And people go, Inglewood, oh.
Well, the crime issue.
Not going there. Yeah.
Yeah,
And there is and the thing is too, there is a reality there.
That's what I'm
I don't want to
saying.
gloss things over, but it's the truth is in the middle. It's not all crime.
Right, of course not.
It's not no crime. And I think right now, as Inglewood, it is attracting businesses. There's that whole Century Corridor that's happened.
Right.
But then my question is, okay, well, all right, you have a Jamba Juice, and a Starbucks. Have you arrived? Well, what do you do next?
Yeah.
There has to be something else besides that. It's like I think about what attracts people to Hollywood, which isn't a city, but it's a place. It's not Starbucks. You can find a Starbucks pretty much anywhere. A Gap.
Right.
That's better. A Gap is better than having a liquor store. But in the end, why do people go to a place? What do they go? It has to be a reason to go. People go to Hollywood for obvious reasons. They're looking for, the Walk of Fame, just the name. Maybe Hollywood's a bad example, but even like Larchmont, one of the, a little area of LA, they don't go there. They don't go there to go to the Blockbuster. They go because there's something else that attracts them there. And so Inglewood hasn't quite figured out what it's about and what will bring people here.
What about the home prices? I mean, what about the home prices, and how does that affect who can afford and who will live here?
Well, Inglewood's a great housing bargain, which may be why people will come here. I mean, I say, bargain, quote unquote, because nothing in LA County is a bargain.
No.
But you can get, like I have friends who live in Westchester, which is hard by Inglewood, very different demographics. And a house that you can get in Inglewood for, say $500,000, $550,000, is $900,000 in Westchester.
Wow.
I call it the white tax because if there's a critical mass of whites, then the housing prices just go up. It's just it's very much race and realty are tied.
Yes.
So there are obvious advantages to Inglewood, but it's not cheap.
No, it's not.
It is not. Increasingly, one of the things I think about is who can afford to even live here anywhere anymore. I think the LA Times did a story last year about they were looking for houses in LA County that were $200,000 or thereabouts. They found two streets. One place was across the street from Jordan Downs in Watts. And another place was, I think, somewhere in Compton, and that was it. So there are houses in Inglewood, or at least one house that I have seen because I walk by it all the time, is asking $750,000. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's probably relatively a good price, but I don't know who can afford that. But a lot of people bought
Whites.
Yeah, well.
How about whites saving money moving to Inglewood?
And here's the thing: middle class blacks, let's say, who can't afford it, probably would move here. But I don't know.
Wouldn't move, you say?
Would not.
Right.
They would take that money and go
I
to a more, a less colored place.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, these are all theories.
No, but they're good theories, and look, let's face it. Well, that's what the Roundtable is all about.
Yeah,
Let's just be honest and talk about
Okay,
it.
fine.
Speaking of honesty, and I'm going to just change the subject for a second because I know your dad was a writer.
He is a writer.
Your dad is a writer,
Right.
and Aubry, and a lot of people just don't know. Talk a little bit about the family thing.
Oh, sure. Well, my father's name is Larry Aubry.
Right.
And actually, he would say he's not a writer. He writes a column for the LA Sentinel. Doing it for 20 years. But he's not a writer. He's an activist who happens to write.
My favorite kind of writers.
He calls me the writer, which I appreciate. But he is a big influence on me. He is retired now, but he worked for many years for the LA County Human Relations Commission, which was been around a long time. Was around during the Zoot Suit riots in the 40s, or created right after that, and of course came to prominence again after 1965, after the Watts riot. So he spent a lot of time as a consultant. Well, that was his career. He was a consultant with the county, which meant that he was trying to get a lot of interethnic coalitions going long before it became fashionable. The whole multicultural thing was something that was his job. He said it's a job he never really finished. I mean, it's still a lot of work to be done there. But he is very much at the grassroots level, still out there, still joining groups.
Right.
He's 72 now, almost 73, and still sort of trying to change the paradigm, which I admire.
Right. Sure.
That people can go through 50 years of you know,
And still
trying.
still notice the paradigm change.
Right, and still shooting for that change,
Right, exactly.
and very much involved, you know, not, you know, still on the front lines. I find that, on the days that I feel tired of, or I feel like, gee, I write about this and the same issue over and over and it's not changing anything, or it's not, I think about people like my father, who is not an option to stop trying. And so anyway, he's almost an LA native. He came here from New Orleans. Both my family's all from New Orleans, what used to be New Orleans.
Right.
You know, and so he was first generation LA. Well, he came here when he was 8 years old. He actually integrated Fremont High School.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
A real horrible experience. And people always get surprised when I say, yeah, well, you know, he went to Fremont High School in 1949, 1950. Right. And they were just starting to open up, you know, to open up the schools. And he said that he was burned in effigy. Mm. He ran home from school every day. And that kind of, you know, yeah. And people get very surprised to hear that happened in Los Angeles. But Los Angeles is made up of people from Midwest, South. Sure. I mean, you know, it's very interesting in a way. People think, well, how could that happen here? Well, yeah. It's America. Yes. So, you know, although the funny thing is, he was still better off here than he was in New Orleans. So right. That's everything's compared. Talk
a little bit about that. You wrote an article about your dad, about how you didn't understand what it was.
Oh yes, when I was little, yeah. I didn't know what he did. I would ask my mother. My mother would say, "Well, your father goes to meetings." So I would tell people my father went to meetings. I still didn't know what kind of meetings they were, but my father was a very serious guy, and I knew what he did was very important. I didn't understand the import of what he did, but I understood it slowly as I got older. I think it took me until I was about 18 to really understand what he did. And I thought, wow. When I really understood what he did, I thought, wow. How's he gonna know when that's done? Or how do you? I don't know. I thought that was. It really amazed me. And I thought, how does he get a feeling of satisfaction at the end of the day? You know. Well, anyway, he's just wired that way.
So now you're doing it.
Oh, I don't know if I'm. No, you know what? I don't know if I'm doing it like.
Not doing it like that.
Well, I don't really have the stamina to do what he does. And all I do is write. Right. That just involves me. Right. That doesn't involve me getting together 25 people trying to start.
All those meetings.
Yeah, those meetings, those endless meetings in which no one agrees on anything, and
all those chiefs.
And you're asking the same questions after 40 years. You know, we're laughing, but it ain't funny. Yeah, you know. And my father has the same criticisms now as he did in 1968. Is he disappointed? Yeah, but that's no reason for him to stop. He's a real idealist. He's a real dreamer. Yeah. And I just think in a way very patriotic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because he keeps asking the same questions, expecting different results, and expecting and hoping things will change. And things have changed. Yeah. But, you know, this is America. We go for ideals. And I really admire that. He just...
Especially when you've been around. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's...
when you've been around as long as he has, and he's seen the kinds of things that he's seen and written about them, it's not going to be enough until it's really right.
And in many instances, he's the Lone Ranger. He's the only guy saying what he's saying. Actually, I realize this now I realize this. My father's problem are not his enemies; they're his friends. Because they'll say, yeah, right on, you're right, but they don't really stand with him.
Right.
And many times he's the only guy taking the position. And that's great, but if you really want, you want change across the board, you got to work with people.
Sure.
You got to work with people, even though they may not agree with you, and that's the hardest thing in the world to do is to have something change direction. But you can't do it by yourself. Mm-hmm. If you could, we'd all be in better place, I think.
Yeah.
But so I really, like I said, he's retired, but he's really far from retired. He'll never retire.
I was going to ask you, since he's retired, how does he feel about what's happening at the Sentinel, and what's his take on where they are?
He has his criticism of the Sentinel. He's actually criticized the Sentinel in the Sentinel.
Good for him.
Yeah, but again, you know, the people like Danny Bacon was a friend of his. All the people, you know, but he did not hesitate to criticize people that he knows, which I think is a certain kind of courage.
I want to meet Larry.
And to do it publicly. So he also kind of created kind of a stir. Like a couple of years ago, he said in the Sentinel that he's been very critical of Inglewood politics, of the mayor, and you know, accused the mayor of taking money from Walmart, and got the Sentinel, pulled the Sentinel into a lawsuit.
So the mayor sued.
The mayor sued actually the Sentinel and my father jointly, you know, for libel.
Talk about that for a minute.
Well,
That's
you know,
interesting.
yeah. Well, you know, this was during the mayoral campaign of what, the last was 2000. Yeah.
When
The
Walmart
last
thing,
exactly.
when the Walmart thing came.
Exact 2004.
And your dad wrote.
Several critical columns. Yeah. And said that Dorn had reportedly taken $40,000 from Rothbard, which is basically the Walmart,
right.
you know, Walmart's company, and Dorn was very upset about that, and wound up suing.
For slander.
I think it was libel or slander. To make a long story short, this went on. The case was thrown out because the judge decided, as public officials are held to a higher standard of, you know, if you're getting sued for libel, and if you're an elected official, there's a higher standard of proof, higher burden of proof with that. People are supposed to criticize you. You can't just say somebody called me a name and I'm going to sue them. And so anyway, it all turned out okay for the Sentinel and for my dad, but I was kind of surprised. He tends to get not very much reaction from with things he writes, and so, but obviously that hit a nerve.
Well, good, which is what it should have done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, your dad. Well, first of all, hopefully, sometime in the near future, you will agree to sit down and do a show about a hard news show about journalism. Your dad's got to be the first guest.
Oh yeah, he'd
He's
be
gotta be the
great.
first guest.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What you feeling about it? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because I know our executive producer, Milton R.F. Brown, who's a genius in his own right. Jeez, I hope he didn't hear me say that. He explained to me that there was a possibility that there would be. Now, we deal on the Roundtable with, you know, all kinds of things, but very rarely do we deal with journalists, hard news, and that would be perfect for somebody like yourself.
I suppose so. I kind of resist thinking of myself as a hard news reporter. There are people who do that.
Host of a talk show is what we're talking about.
Okay.
Because you certainly could do it.
I could do it.
You could do it.
I could do it. I'm more. I think of myself more as a cultural critic than a hard news reporter, but I've done it. And you know, in some ways that's an artificial division. News, culture, politics. It's all kind of the same.
Yeah, because I find myself at the Roundtable talking to all kinds of people, but to have a show, a hard news show for the community,
right,
in Inglewood.
Oh, I think that'd be great. I mean, I think it's much needed.
Let's go back to LA Times. Are they selling that newspaper? What's happening?
Well, as you might know, first, you know, newspapers in general have lost money over the last 15 years. You know, because the whole newspaper business is changing. This is just to set this up. You know, the competition from the internet. In some ways, papers are competing with themselves. They all have online editions, but they can't quite figure out how to make money on online. They got to have them. Right. So they've all lost revenue, and the Times has lost revenue. They've lost subscriptions. Yeah. They had a huge fallout. Frankly, since we're talking frankly, they lost a lot of subscriptions when I came on last year because before I came on to the Times, they let go of a very popular columnist named Bob Scheer. Yeah. An icon to many people. I mean, and frankly, I read him as a reader. I read him all the time.
I enjoyed him.
Yeah. I'm not. So they got there was an upheaval there. They lost a lot of subscriptions that they never got back, and let's just say the revenues have not been going up. And the Times, I think, is the first major paper in the country that got bought by an outside company, Chicago Tribune. So the Chicago Tribune runs the Los Angeles Times, which has been a real struggle.
The Chandler
sold it. The Chandler
They
sold it to
Right.
the Chicago Trib.
Okay.
And it's been very strange because, in a way, the Chicago Tribune itself, the paper, is not as major paper as the LA Times.
No,
So there's some strange dynamic there, and it hasn't been all that smooth. So that's been a problem. Chicago trying to figure out the LA market, and they're still trying to figure it out. So yeah, it's not really rosy right now. What that means, and that has affected the coverage. That has affected. They keep playing with formulas. And I think what happens with newspapers, what's happening with a lot of papers, I think is really dangerous. They're trying to figure out what do people want to read versus what should we be reporting.
Right.
It becomes a product. And it's always a product. I mean, newspapers are a business. They're not a public service. But in a way, they are a public service. But I think more and more they're going towards the focus group thing.
Yeah.
What'll get people to pick up the paper? And that's starting to dictate. I mean, that's not a new thing, but it's increasingly starting to dictate what goes in the paper, which, from a journalist perspective, makes me nervous.
The Chandlers aren't happy about that as well.
No, hey, they sold it.
Yeah. Did you ever get a chance to meet them in '92 when you were?
The Chandler family?
Yeah.
No, I think I might have walked through the newsroom. Otis Chandler, who died, just this past year?
Right.
Just a few months ago. Walked through the newsroom once or twice. I mean, truly, he was a larger-than-life figure, but I didn't meet them. I didn't meet him personally.
Yeah.
But they were always present, very present.
They sold it.
I think some of them are regretting that. They're regretting that.
Yeah, I can imagine that they are.
Yeah, and people have been out. There have been people in LA who've talked about buying the paper, sort of buying it back, or not, buying it so that it'll be locally owned.
They're a more liberal family than those Chicago people anyway.
Yeah, but it's just odd. It's never happened that a major newspaper of a big city has been owned by someone, by a group outside.
That's very strange.
It's a first. New York Times is still owned by the Salzburgers, and of course, Chicago Tribune is owned by Chicago Group, and so it's been an experiment that hasn't really worked out that well so far. And now people like David Geffen and the local LA moguls are talking about buying the LA Times so that at least it'll be locally owned. So
I don't think that would be a bad idea, to be absolutely honest with you.
Yeah, Richard Riordan has been raised.
Riordan, who was a Republican, but
well,
I mean, there's some good guys out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But David Geffen could probably, bring it back into line.
I'm trying to remember the asking price, and it's pretty steep.
Pretty steep.
Yeah, but it probably could be done.
Now you're going to be at the Times you're there. You don't have any.
Well, Robert, it's fine for now, but anything can change. I'm not trying to be pessimistic or anything, but who knows?
Yeah.
Many people in the last 5-6 years, have been many turnovers at the Times.
Yes.
People who spent their careers there.
Yeah. Lots over the last 5 years.
So I'll say that I'm there now, and I'm enjoying myself. I think it's having an impact. I'm never really sure, and hopefully it'll continue.
Well, I look forward to enjoying you as host of the Journalist Roundtable. I thank you so much for coming and sitting and talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
The LA audiences now get a good look at who you are and what you're about. And that's all I wanted to do.
Okay. Well, I hope they do.
Thank you so much, Erin.
Oh, thanks, Robert. Thanks a lot.